Gareth, the UK vaccination programme has been arguably quite a success. What's driven that and what are the next steps from here?
So it's been definitely incredible, really, the efforts that have gone in there. So I think the first thing that was crucial was, getting access, buying access, essentially very early on to supply. Obviously, a significant amount at the beginning came from Oxford University / AstraZeneca, also other vaccines that have proven to show very high efficacy. We took the risk to buy access to those, and so that effort done there was critical at the beginning, and then just the speed and effort that's gone into actually rolling out the vaccine. We pushed the boundaries in terms of shifting the dosing timings. Trials were done at sort of 28 days. We pushed things out to 12 weeks, and wanting to get particularly the higher risk people their first dose of vaccine, et cetera, et cetera. So, and the people involved in doing it. And, I'm sure you saw the amazing people giving the vaccines at the vaccine centre. So, yeah, absolutely incredible. I think from here, what's super important is that continues. We need to get as much of the population vaccinated as possible, because that's really how we, in the future, cope with COVID still being around as a pandemic, but it's still likely going to be around for the future. And so the vaccination and getting that vaccination rate to the highest level possible is absolutely crucial.
As vaccination rates around the world accelerate, how do you think, looking a bit further ahead, we'll learn to live with COVID?
Yeah, that is a really good question, and obviously, hopefully, if we can get vaccination rates to very high levels across the world in all areas, that's going to be the main way we shift this situation forward. So very high vaccinations, hopefully you'll see future variants of COVID, but hopefully the vaccines will maintain their efficacy, and then we can move to, with confidence, a much more hopefully open situation around the world. Now, these vaccines aren't 100% efficacious. We are going to see the infections around, but what's crucial to keep an eye on is hospitalisation rates, etc. So, if we can get to that level with the vaccinations, then I think the outlook's positive for opening up, and we can learn to live with that. Now, we may need boosters, we may need antiviral drugs, we may need other treatments to still continue to be developed, better vaccines that are changed slightly because of the variants, etc. But hopefully, if we can get to high vaccination rates across the world, then it will be a manageable situation to live with in the future.
Okay, and there's less talk certainly in the developed world around supply issues on the vaccine, but obviously there's still many places around the world that don't have the access yet. What efforts are in place to ensure and accelerate access to the vaccine?
Well, I think there was, a few months back, a real big, a huge amount of noise about shifting that situation, getting access into emerging markets. So there's lots of organisations, charities, even individuals who've got heavily involved in paying for supply of vaccine. The challenge with vaccines is obviously it takes time to manufacture, there have been hiccups on the way, which is always the risk in manufacturing these type of products. But hopefully supplies, only increasing this year and next year, and so we'll get supply at the right levels to all the countries and to as many people as possible, because again, that's what's so important in every country, getting vaccination rates to the highest levels possible, if we want to turn this into a situation where we can live with COVID being there.
And a lot of focus at the moment on variants. How concerned are you about future mutations of the virus?
I think you've got to expect future mutations, as nature of viruses. The focus is on the Delta variant. It's super infectious, spreads very, very quickly. With what we've seen with vaccination rates, I think it's going to be crucial to analyse the data. Now, we're seeing infections shoot up everywhere, obviously, but in heavily vaccinated populations, there's a big difference now in hospitalisation and death rates. So we really need to keep focus on what happens with those trends, hospitalisations obviously in particular. So it's super important that those levels stay low, and then we know that the vaccines are being successful. So expectation, we'll get more mutations and they'll be reported and we'll see what happens. Hopefully the vaccines will maintain their efficacy alongside that, you are going to see development of new vaccines, maybe modified for variants that are prominent, boosters potentially if we need them. And then there's also going to be generation of new drugs, particularly very specific antiviral drugs that could work very effectively. So I think those will be really important as well in terms of coping with these different variants or mutants, which we should definitely expect to continue to hear reports about, in the long term.
Okay, so clearly not out of the woods yet, but looking a bit further ahead, as and when vaccination rates globally are at a peak level, does that take away the need for lockdowns in the future?
I think on that, vaccines aren't 100% efficacious. So you are going to have people being infected, and then you've got these higher risk groups, particularly the elderly or those with impacted immune systems, that are more at risk. So you may need lockdowns in the future. I would anticipate so to some extent, like winter, particularly for the at-risk the populations. But the way I would sort of think about it is hopefully with the protection of vaccines, we can be much more sophisticated about it, a minimised scale of lockdowns, etc., etc. And we've certainly had enough practice of them. Hopefully we'll learn how to manage those lockdown situations much more effectively. So that's the way I'm currently thinking about it. Now, if we, worst case, we get a variant that causes a lot more problems and vaccine efficacy just doesn't sustain, then you've got a different situation and lockdowns will be significant again. But let's hope that's not the case.
Let's hope not, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So the pandemic's clearly been a tragedy, but the response globally has been tremendous, and the healthcare industry has been at the forefront of that. Looking ahead, what lessons do you think will come out of this in terms of tackling future pandemics and approaches to R&D?
What has been so impressive is the speed at which we've had diagnostic tests and vaccines come through. A lot of risk was taken, particularly if you look at sort of, say, the mRNA vaccines from Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech, the first vaccines that came out with that technology. So I think incredible amounts have been learned. I think governments, are very focused on efforts for the next potential pandemics. So that, there's going to be a complete shift in the amount of work going on there and efforts around that in all sorts of different ways. So we're definitely seeing that, hearing about that impact and what's going on there. So that's going to be super important. And then I think, again, coming back to this speed of product development in critical situations, I think that's a great thing in terms of, I imagine that changes to some extent the speed at which R&D is sort of used, applied, what have you, to generate these products. But I think, the regulatory environment is very different, right? We needed these products at a critical time, critical pace. I think, for broader sort of disease illnesses, we'll be back to the sort of standard track. But hopefully things are learned from on the regulatory side as well, because, the regulatory burden is huge on cost in R&D, how much it costs to get drugs to market, and the risks of getting approval of products. So hopefully there'll be lessons learned there as well, so there'll be a big impact for the future.